Pastor Gene, this is a very new thing that we're doing today. We are actually recording on a Sunday, the Sunday before the release, because today is August the 7th. Good morning. Today we have a lot of hot topics to talk about. They are very, very hot. Tres, what's the word for hot in picante?
Leche.
Tres leches is a cake that I love. I don't think that means hot in the language that I'm trying to speak.
It's milk.
Leches is milk?
Dolce.
What's dolce? I thought dolce
means
was
sweet.
caramel. Oh my goodness. I just know my Spanish from an Italian from an ice cream store.
I don't know Spanish. I only know Latin. So I'm
Isn't
guessing.
dolce a music thing?
I don't know.
Dulce. Anyway, today we'll be talking about the Christian and politics. How are we supposed to view politics? That is what is on the docket, the menu, if you will, for this Monday morning. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Samuel Ying the First.
Is there a second?
No, this isn't like an announcement type of podcast.
Oh, okay.
And we have with us Pastor Eugene Kim. Very nice to see you today. Very cool and very hip. We are going to be doing, I guess, a Q&A from the past WWE. Bum, ba-dum, bum. That's what we're going to be doing. You know, I've been asking Brian to put in the John Cena song for weeks now. I'm just for weeks. I can't even get one thing. I've been asking him for weeks. He won't do it because of some copyright thing. Is
What?
it a copyright issue?
He put it in. The
He
bum,
did?
bum, bum. Yeah, he did it last time.
My apologies, Brian. Bam, ba-dam, bam. We're going to be talking about the WWE topic of politics. Pastor Eugene, I think you may have shocked a lot of people when you said that the Christian message is a political message, a very political message, in that we are saying that Jesus Christ is Lord. We're not saying that Caesar is Lord, that we are saying that Jesus is Lord, and that is a very political thing to say. And I thoroughly enjoyed your talk on politics. And again, we have these recordings available for you in the CGS app. So if you missed this past one or even any of the ones prior, you can always check on our app. And we have the WWE section there for you to listen back. But I wanted to ask a couple questions about politics. Well, first of all, oh my goodness, how could I have forgotten? Today is day 1 of week 4 of our summer school. So please do pray for us that we would persevere to the end, that our school will be glorifying to the Lord. And so please keep us in your prayers as we embark on this final week. But going into politics, Pastor Eugene, the first question that everyone's wondering, I'm wondering, is who are you voting for?
Who are you voting for?
Yeah.
Yeah, not the one that condones baby killing, and far leftist policies which go opposite of what the Bible is dictating on what is good, what is right, what is noble, what is pure, what is beautiful. And it doesn't mean that any political party needs to be perfect, but there is a trajectory, and if the trajectory is a far cry from what the Bible says, then it's really hard for me to endorse or cast a vote for the party.
So I say this because, especially in the previous election, presidential election, a lot of people came out saying that if you're a Christian, you cannot vote Democrat. That's what people had said. Does that mean that Christians can only be Republicans? Like, where are we supposed to line up in this party era of politics as a Christian?
It's truly a fascinating time, I think, because so many people are now aware of like the political machine.
Yeah.
That's why it's interesting. Back maybe 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have known like any of the policies. Like I'm talking about you specifically because
Me.
you're not into politics. Yeah.
No,
The policies that Obama set forth like
No.
10 years ago. You wouldn't have even like cared.
Obama was like a cool guy to me.
Yeah. He just went on interviews, talk shows,
Yeah,
and, you know, people were hooking it up with him. So he was like this cool guy everybody wanted to be with and be like. And after that, when Trump got elected, people became hyper aware and hypersensitive of all the things that are happening because everything was highlighted and thrown in our faces with the, you know, the 24/7 news cycle again and
Mhm.
again and again.
Mhm.
Like every single one of Trump's tweets were read and
Yep.
parsed, and
yep.
they basically did an exegesis on his tweet
They
every
did.
day
Yeah.
on CNN. That's what happened. And so people became hyper aware, not only hyper aware, but the emotions were riled up and people got angrier and angrier. And so when you're angry, you pay attention, right? And so that's why people knew the names of like the press secretaries, I don't know, the head of staff, chief of staff.
Mm.
People knew all their names. And people still know the names of like, I don't know, the common person knows the name of the press secretary of the United States president right now too.
Yeah.
And so those are things that the common person who wasn't really into politics would not have known, but now we all know, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes people wouldn't even know the vice president's names. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like who was George Herbert Walker Bush's vice president?
Al Gore.
Al Gore was Bill Clinton's.
Oh, William. Forgot about him.
Right. And who was George Bush's vice president?
Al Gore.
Like people don't even know the vice
Yeah,
president of the United
yeah.
States. They don't even remember. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And so I mean, let's go back further. People don't know, but when you become hyper aware, people become very stressed, and it's an unfortunate state that we're in. I think when the country is doing well, the executive branch is doing well, then you don't really care. Does that make sense? It's when the executive branch is doing poorly or made to look like it's doing poorly, you are made to be hyper aware.
Mm.
And so that's why I think Christians are more stressed about, you know, all the elections and the voting that's going on.
It was Dick Cheney.
Yeah, I know who.
No.
Vice president,
I
right?
know that you know, but but I knew that. I just needed a reminder. That's
Mhm.
all. So it seems like then Christians aren't necessarily more Republican or more Democrat. It's as a Christian, we are to align with what the Bible says about the different issues that these parties are kind of duking it out in, right?
Well, in a better scenario than today's, a Christian would have been able to join ultimately the core ideology of the parties.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
Republican and Democrat, they're both trying to get good government for the will of the people.
Mm.
But now it's more like evil is being promulgated and corruption is rampant among senators and other politicians. And especially now with our sitting president, who is obviously corrupt, and we're finding out more and more how deep the corruption goes. It's literally a crime family that we have from the president down into his, you know, his brother and his son and things like that. And so it's very unfortunate, but I do believe that corruption runs deep because he didn't start doing it like 5 years ago. He most obviously started doing it a very, very long time ago, where they would peddle influence. They would, you know, work in these gray areas of selling influence in Washington, D.C. to now taking bribes of, you know, in upwards of, what is it now, like over $20 million. And that they know of, that they can track.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we now are aware even of Trump's failings, as Biden's failings. We're hyper aware of, you know, the president's character. And we're less inclined to think about policies other than the big name ones like abortion or healthcare or something like that.
Yeah.
And so other than that, you know, people don't really care as much, or they're not aware as much. But there are things that are going on. And so it's really difficult, I would think, then now in today's season of politics to vote for a party that is 100% to making sure that we adopt the most extreme form of abortion, which is, you can abort the baby anytime.
So you keep on bringing up abortion. And, I know that we've addressed this issue and this question before in our previous podcast, but I think a lot of times people kind of join us halfway. But you keep on bringing abortion, but there are a lot of other topics out there. Why abortion specifically? Because don't we then fall into the trap of what they call single issue voting? And isn't that something that's not really good?
Yeah. People could have different takes on abortion. There was a party called Democrats for Life. I don't know if they still exist.
Yeah.
So they align with the Democratic Party except for the abortion issue.
Yeah.
But they will still vote Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
But now Democrats, and I mentioned this before, but Democrats will not extend their umbrella to also accept the Democrats for Life group, meaning that they won't, even let them lobby their cause for the Democratic Party. But single issue voting is interesting. What people mean by it is also something that I probably want to explore when someone asks me that. What do you mean by that? If abortion is the most egregious, most demonic thing that is happening in our country today, and you don't say anything about it, then I think there's something wrong with you not saying anything about it. If you recognize this is a truly demonic act that is going on, it's the sacrificing of our children to Molech, which God detests, which God, curses. And so Christians are there to warn people about God's laws. So you can be a part of the country. You can't even be part of a party, but you are there not to give, submission ultimately to a party, but it is to God. And even if you're part of a party, whether it's the Democratic or Republican or independent, whatever it is, you're supposed to speak out as an ambassador of Christ, meaning you share about what God's laws are. That's exactly, actually, a little history. That's exactly how our country was founded. It's because they took on biblical principles, and that's why they wrote out the Declaration of Independence. Those are biblical principles. Those are underlying laws that God had given that they were able to write down in their declaration in defiance of the British Empire or the monarchy.
I do want to talk about the American Revolution in just a second, but just to kind of summarize your answer for the single issue voting, it depends on how you would define single issue voting, and also the reason why you're so consistently against a party that would support abortion is because it is a sin that is explicitly, it's sinful. It's evil.
Yeah, there are ranges of evil in a sin.
Right.
If I smack you in the face,
please,
or I stab you with a knife, they are both sins, but there's obviously a range.
Yeah.
And so the killing of the unborn is at the top of that list of sins.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been convinced, and so many of our young women have been convinced, and men, that killing an unborn child, taking a pill, whatever it is okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe if they're a Christian or grew up in the church, it's a morally gray area. It's not. It's absolutely not. And so who speaks out? Who's the prophet of our nation in these times? It's the people who speak and share the word of God. And that's what we ought to do. And so when we come to abortion, we are talking about it precisely because we have an entire party that is going directly against what God has said is detestable. And this is not just like, we can debate certain aspects of or dimensions of these policies and laws. This is outright, just a murdering of babies.
Yeah. But I've actually even heard people argue against that, saying, well, maybe the Democrats do support abortion, but what about Republican policies? What about life outside of the womb? The Republican policies don't protect and serve people that are outside the womb. What about the quality of life outside of the womb? If you care so much about life, why are you so just focused on life inside the womb and not life outside of it?
Yeah, I think that's just a straw man, to be honest. And look, bottom line is if you don't like the Republican Party, don't vote for the Republican ticket. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But you can't vote for the Democratic ticket if you are a Christian. For me, there's just no gray area on this one.
Yeah.
And that's actually what John Piper did. He didn't vote for President Trump when he was up on the ticket, and Wayne Grudem and he had a back and forth. Very, very cordial. And we talked about
very
it.
nice.
Yeah, we talked about it on the podcast. So
yeah, we did.
You can disagree. Like, I disagree with John Piper's assessment. But at the same time, you can disagree in the Lord and be gracious to each other. And I think that's what we ought to do. There are some things that we might not completely agree on, but any Christian cannot support abortion. There is no way that you could support. That's like supporting murder. You can't support murder. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work that way. You can't change what the Bible says to fit your current social agenda that the party is promulgating. And so that's where, if you're saying single issue voters, maybe we are on the flip side of that. We're single issue non-voters, meaning because of this issue, we will never vote for your party. If you continue to fully support abortion without any restriction, we can't support you at all.
Yeah,
at all. And so I don't think the Christian in their right conscience. Now, people can be ignorant. Maybe people just don't know. That's fine. Ignorance doesn't mean that you're going to be not sinning. You are still sinning.
Yeah.
But willfully sinning is, again, way more worse. Now that you know that abortion is evil, it's detestable in the sight of God, you can't support it.
Yeah. You brought up the American Revolution. When you started the talk on politics, you talked about Romans chapter 13 and how every person is to be subject to the governing authorities. And the reason is because there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. And this is Romans chapter 13, verse 1. What about the American Revolution? By them revolting, by them leaving, wasn't that in itself, by them fighting against the government that was ruling over them at the time, isn't that going against what Romans 13:1 is saying?
Yeah, there was a fierce debate back and forth between Christians, ministers of the faith of the Protestant church that went back and forth on whether this was a justified revolution or war or battle, or it was not. So it wasn't black and white for a lot of people. And so there was a fierce back and forth. Unfortunately, some Anglican priests would join ranks with the British in America. But a lot of Protestant, meaning like Baptists, Presbyterians, they would not join those ranks. And, I think I talked about it before, but they would be called the Black Regiment because they donned black robes to preach, because that's what Presbyterian ministers do. And right afterwards, they would be holding a rifle to fight in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
One of the things that people also did was, which I didn't mention, is that once the Declaration of Independence was written, they didn't send it to the common man. They didn't print out pamphlets and spread it around. Guess who they gave it to? They gave it to the ministers. And the ministers would read this, and they would evaluate it according to their theological understanding and their biblical understanding. And when the ministers would read this, what they were encouraged to do was, after they gave their holy service to God, this is in their letters that this, after you give your holy service to God, before you dismiss the people, read the Declaration of Independence. Make sure it's in line with our confessions of faith.
Yeah.
And if you read the Declaration of Independence, it's chock full of theological and biblical language. Things like, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
This is a theological, biblical statement. Interestingly enough, our Vice President, Kamala Harris, quoted the Declaration of Independence and took out life because she was
Oh.
talking about abortion. So she said, in the Declaration of Independence, we are given liberty and the pursuit of happiness. I was like, whoop,
Oh,
skip one.
Kamala.
Yeah. Anyway, these are things that they were able to come not in direct rebellion against the monarchy, but because of what the law had already established, saying that you are going against the law that you had already established in the country. So by you doing this to us, whether it's taxation without representation or the unfair penal system, where if the way they punished colonialists, people in the American colonies, where they would charge them with something that they didn't like they didn't pay some kind of tax or something like that. They would charge them with something,
Yeah.
but they would take them to court, not in the States. They would take them to court in Britain.
Right.
So you'd have to take a ship all the way back to Britain, and lose years of your life.
Mm.
And that alone is punishment.
Mm.
Thinking about that and looking at what's happening now to Donald Trump, it has a very similar tone, a color to it, but by putting him through all these lawsuits and all these like indictments against him, they're basically tying up his finances and his time and his hands and his, his like
sanity.
Basically his whole mind. Yeah, is now revolving around these cases.
Yeah.
And they can't have a fair election that way. And so that's exactly what the British government did. And so they took it upon themselves to remind them, this is actually not the laws that you yourselves have set up. We are following your laws. And when they came in to fight them, they had every right to defend themselves. So do I personally think the American Revolution was justified? I think absolutely. And it was completely different from the French Revolution. The French Revolution was to upturn and abolish the existing form of government, to make a brand new one. That's not what they wanted. Americans wanted a constitutional government, which they were from. So, you've learned in school about the Magna Carta that the monarch can't just dictate whatever he wants on a whim. He is also under the power of the Constitution, of the written law. And so the written law reigns supreme in that country. So who's king? It's the law. Law's king. If that's the case, then even their own monarch is not following the king. So we have every right to follow what the Constitution is saying. We have every right to defend ourselves according to the law and the customs of the nation that we are a part of. And so when they decided not to do that and started to even aggravate more, persecute more, that's when the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. Just a day before your wedding anniversary, is it?
Yeah.
July 4th, right?
Yeah.
Your wedding anniversary is July 5th. Anyway,
It's July 3rd.
this is July 3rd?
Yeah.
Oh, day after, right? And so if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's talking about what the king did wrong. This is what you did wrong. This is what tyranny is, and this is against the laws. In fact, the first thing that it says in the Declaration of Independence is that he, meaning the monarch, the king, he has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. And so he's not following the laws of the country. And so it's not just simply, we're just going to throw the tea overboard because we don't like the taxes on this and things like that. It's a big part. It's when, it's the straw that broke the camel's back, that kind of thing. And so there are a lot of things. So they actually wrote it out where, they would list out all the terrible things that the tyrannical government was doing over the colonies.
Magna Carta is also a Jay-Z album. But I was wondering, so you reminded us on this past Wednesday, that the context that Paul is writing this letter to the Romans is obviously during the reign of the Roman Empire, and we have emperors like Nero who are their own law, who would persecute Christians in terrible, gruesome ways. That and I think you mentioned this, and it was a really great point. It's movies don't even depict these things because they're so gruesome. That's how these Christians were killed. wouldn't that then give Christians reason to say, hey, this emperor has no law. He just rules on his own whims. He's the law. We need to revolt against this government. But it seems like Paul is writing to these people saying, hey, remain under authority. And so for Americans, or I guess, the people that revolted against Great Britain, isn't that like a lesser case for them to revolt?
Yeah, I think there are differences between the two. And let me just explain this really quickly. Christians, it doesn't mean that Christians are silent when this happens to them. So Christians that speak out, Justin Martyr famously wrote his Apologia saying, look, to the emperor, Christians are the people that go bend over backwards to try to follow your laws. They're the best citizens. They pay their taxes. They obey every single law because it's our God who commands them to obey them. But if it goes against what God had explicitly commanded, like the worship of the emperor, Christians cannot do that. But we are the best citizens. And so he wrote his Apologia. And so in the same sense, Americans could, understanding this, would have bent over backwards to try and do the best they could. But they understood that it wasn't just that Nero is absolute law and the monarch was the absolute law. It's not the same scenario. Again, I would say, Britain had purported itself as to be a nation governed by laws, just as America is now. So a lot of the stuff that we do now also was imported by what Britain had done. And even back before that, what the Roman Empire had established in their republic. And so if you understand the Roman Empire, you understand how Britain became where it is before the American Revolution, and you understand how Christ is king over all, that's how it all culminated into this great nation and the constitution that governs the nation. And so I think they're different for various reasons because of that. Again, there was a debate on it. People like John MacArthur disagree that the American Revolution was not biblical. So John MacArthur would disagree. He would side on the place where any kind of revolution is going against the Bible. But for me, I particularly think that the American Revolution was a justified one, not because we were trying to revolt and start a new government. We were trying to revolt and maintain the peace and the government and the constitution that already made the nation thrive to where it was. And so, it is what it is. You could disagree. I think that you could still debate, but in the end, it is also vastly different from the French Revolution. The French Revolution is terrible. Yeah, you can watch Les Mis and you can cry over, the songs that they sing there. 46201. I don't know.
I've never seen Les Miserables. I've never seen it.
But the musical is great, but the French Revolution itself is a terrible, terrible thing that happened. And France is suffering because of that. Look at a few hundred years later where France is now. France is not in a good place. Whereas America is the most powerful nation in the world.
America number one.
Yeah, but we're literally throwing away all the things that made us great in the first place. We're throwing all the laws. We're obstructing people from like getting justice here and making up our own rules about equity, and literally not following the Constitution. People are saying, places like CNN, that the Constitution is a document written by white men, so we should reject it. And so apparently the color of your skin has everything to do and trumps theology now. And so that's what our young people are learning. Like, Constitution, that's like white people stuff. They haven't read the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, but they can just say that, right?
Diversity is the new excellence. Talking about what you had discussed this past Wednesday, you talked about institutional sin. I think it was kind of like a little blip here, and you talked about it. What is institutional sin? Do we have any now, today? And who has to repent for them? Because if they're sin, it must be repented of.
Actually, let me take a hot take on this one.
Oh, here we go.
It. Yeah, I think vaccine mandates and those that supported it were supporting institutional sin. Absolutely. I'm not even going to take that one back. It was a rough one for me as a pastor, trying to figure out what was God's will, following what the government had said, and what they were now obviously trying to do, which was to extend their power over the churches to dictate how it should conduct its worship. It's literally what Pharaoh did when Moses went and said, you got to let the people go so they can worship on this mountain. Pharaoh said, no. Let me dictate how you can worship God. You can worship God here. And Moses said, no. You don't get to dictate how the people of God worship God. God dictates that.
Right.
You can't do that. And yeah, we have here the government trying to dictate how Christians should worship God. Don't sing, do it through your masks.
Hum.
By the way, this was done in Korea. This was done in all countries and all over the world to churches, and churches complied. And it just shows us the weakness and the stupidity of the churches, that they don't know what the Bible is teaching. It was like, what's the big deal? It's just singing. No. We've been commanded to sing. What if it kills people? And so if it kills people, should you sing? And you might be like, no. Okay, well, this disease is going to kill people if you sing, so you can't sing. So people are very confused. There's this movie I haven't watched yet, but I've seen some excerpts of it, and maybe I'll get to watch it, but there were no showtimes around here where we are. I don't know. I haven't watched it yet, so it's not necessarily a plug, but it's called The Essential Church. And
by John MacArthur's church.
Yeah. And so The Essential Church just documents what had happened, how people opened up, and how one of the things that really intrigued me and caught my attention was how they wanted to put the government on the stand. So when the government fined them, tried to shut them down, tried to even put John MacArthur in jail.
Yep.
They jailed other pastors, by the way. In Canada, they jailed people, and you remember, you remember like watching those videos of the wife and the children just crying because their dad was being taken away, and they didn't know when they would ever see him again. Maybe never, maybe years. Who knows? They didn't know. They just took him away, put him in jail, put him in maximum security. That's crazy, right? Because he just didn't want to shut down. John MacArthur wanted to go to trial because he wanted to put the government on the stand and say, what is the efficacy of masks? Do you know? How many people are dying? Not with COVID, but because of COVID.
Yep.
Do you know? What's the age group that people are dying? What about comorbidity rates? Is that a factor? He wanted to ask those questions so that they can answer it themselves and say, what we all knew, which was everybody that died of COVID, not with COVID, of COVID, had comorbidity factors of 4 or more. So they had like diabetes, not only diabetes, they had high blood pressure. They had all these things that are affecting their immune system already. What about the age group that were dying? Mostly elderly. What about the efficacy of masks? Now we know that even these liberal outlets are now putting out their studies. Of course, no one reads it because no one cares. The latest poll was taken, like, people don't want to talk about coronavirus anymore. They just want to move on.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen. I want us to remember how weak we were and how fickle we were and how scared we were when there was a virus out there that you might have gotten sick. It might have been pretty bad, but it's definitely not as bad as a stone in your mouth. Like, not even close, bros.
I think I spat on my mic on that one.
Yeah, but not even close. And yeah, we're so scared. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so some people had a bad bout of it. Yeah, and like they had a fever. They were shivering. They didn't know. They were scared that they were going to die because they heard all the media reports of everybody dying. And they didn't die, but they're still scared. They still wear their masks, while they're driving alone, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so because of that fear, that's what drives people. And so, yeah, when do we see the government overextend? We saw it literally like last year. Even they're trying to even do it now with the new, NIH director, talking about lockdowns again and things like that. And so government will always try to overextend and overreach into the church's territory. And this is where Christians must stand up and say, actually, you don't get to dictate what we do. Only God does. God dictates the worship of the saints. And you can give recommendations. You could give like, oh, here are the statistics and the sciences. the science that we know, the data that we have, and we formulated to come to this conclusion. You can agree or disagree, but here it is. You can say stuff like that, but you can't shut down churches, which they did, and churches complied like sheep.
Yep.
And so here we are. I mean, I don't think I was perfect in my response to it either, but you know, I think in our area we were one of the first churches to actually open up. But at the same time, was it soon enough? Was it fast enough? Did I know enough? And so those are things that, you know, I am sort of plagued by, questions that I have, that I just want to, you know, comply with the government because I just want to be a good boy, but it would be going against God's mandate. So those are things that I was challenged by, and I challenged the church as well. Told them not to stay home, come to church. We'll do everything that we can. We'll mask. We'll set up air filters, which you had a large part in acquiring for us. Did it help at all? I have no idea. But now, like I said, now we know. The studies have come out, and I cut myself short. I interrupted myself on that one. But now we know the studies are out. These masks actually were terrible for children. It increased their CO2 levels in there, and so it affected their development, and CO2 levels will affect your brain development. Now we know. Don't mask your kids. It's like, oh, it should have been obvious. You know, those are the things that I'm thinking about. But we had kids masking our church too.
Yeah.
Long-term masking is not good. Otherwise, you could wear your mask 24/7 if it was good.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not good. You're supposed to breathe air. And so those are things that we now know. But if you're not keeping up, because again, like most of the American population, you're tired of Corona news. You don't want to listen to it. You don't read it. There was a website that I followed because it made me so upset with Francis Collins, Tim Keller, Russell Moore, and all those people went on. It's called Church and the Coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
And you could still see it, but they took down all the videos. It's so interesting, right? They took down all the videos, but the videos were all like them promoting, you know, oh, we need to mask, we need to shut down, we need to distance for the sake of our neighbor. It's loving your neighbor to distance. You remember that whole, like that propaganda that they were spewing out? Okay, so if we keep distance, does it help mitigate spread? Where's the scientific proof on that? It's like, no, it's obvious, common sense. If you wear a mask, it'll help mitigate spread. Where's the science on that? It's obvious. And those videos that I saw in like Instagram and TikTok were like, obviously masks work, you idiots. There was such a smugness about those videos where they would put like a mask and then cover a shower head and turn on the shower head, and the water wouldn't pass through the mask. Therefore, it must block coronavirus.
Yeah.
And then people took it, like, look, it's such common sense to wear a mask. And then we all, hook, line, and sinker, took this junk. And so, I'm upset. I'm upset because we're supposed to be the church. We're supposed to live on faith. And we're supposed to follow in faith the mandates of God, obey God. And for a time, maybe when we didn't know the facts, we could have stayed home and masked, washed our vegetables, whatever it is. My wife literally had messages from hospital workers saying we need to wash our vegetables.
Yeah.
And so we washed our vegetables because we didn't want to spread coronavirus.
And wiped our eggs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. How insane is that now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? I think we need to go back and look at it. We need to go back, not just to the American Revolution, go back to last year. Look how weak we are as a church.
Yeah.
And so it is disappointing for me that we were so weak. Not only were we ill-informed by the government, I get it. I'm upset about that too. But even when we had the necessary info, people still turned a blind eye to the info. And I talked about it. I said, you know what I'm upset about is that once you get the coronavirus, no one's talking about prophylactics. No one's talking about actually at-home measures that you could take before you go to the hospital. People are only talking about once you get to the hospital, whether you could take like, you know, oxychloroquine or something like that.
Yeah.
Or you could take remdesivir or horse tranquilizer or horse medication called ivermectin. You know, it's all a lie, by the way. It's not horse medication, but they still call it that in certain circles.
Dewormer.
Yeah, horse dewormer, right? I was upset because once you get coronavirus, you should boost your immune system. You should take antivirals. You should take anti-inflammatories. You should take antioxidants. You should take these things to help you recover more quickly, but people were just staying home in bed doing nothing. Coronavirus doesn't go away from that. You need the sun. You need vitamin D. You need fresh air. You need to breathe. And my mother-in-law was in the hospital when coronavirus first hit. And they didn't have enough room for her. And we didn't know if she was going to make it or not, because this was in the early stages of coronavirus. When it first hit, she got coronavirus and her oxygen levels were so low. She saw people dying all around her, and they didn't even give her room. They just put her on a chair outside in the hallway because, every room was filled. People were scared out of their minds. And then they said to her, I need you to blow into this instrument because your oxygen levels are too low. You need to work on your lungs. And so she saw these people dying and suffering behind her and then around her. And she told herself, I need to do everything that I can to breathe. I need to blow really hard into this breathing apparatus so that I can get, discharged from this hospital, because I'm not going to live if I don't really give it my all. And she had this faith and she had this determination. And guess what? She tried really hard and she was able to overcome it. And she was discharged eventually after a few days. But, during those days, we didn't know either. So I get that there is legitimate concern and even fear of the unknown. But that's not people of faith do. Even after that, we knew, we had the studies, we had, all these studies that were saying, maybe the government hid it from you, but I'm the one that was telling people you can still find it on the NIH.gov website, that they have clinical trials and studies that have been submitted, that just taking bromelain, vitamin C, getting sunlight, drastically reduced your hospitalization rate by more than 50% in some cases, right?
Yeah.
And so just take those prophylactics. Just take natural, supplements. And so did people do that? I think some people did. Some people did. And when I would, tell people that that would get COVID, I would say take these prophylactics, not as a doctor, but just as someone who's been reading all the clinical trials that have been submitted to the NIH. And so, all that stuff, and then the whole vaccine thing came out, and that's another mess that we could save for later or something.
So, you brought up vaccination mandates, and that was actually a question that I had too, because, and this is all going back to Romans chapter 13, verse 1, right? We are supposed to submit ourselves to the authorities. In the context of vaccination mandates, obeying it, and that comes with a caveat, right? Where Peter says we must obey God and not men, right? And so the whole discussion is you are to obey the government as long as the government's mandates and rules do not force you to disobey God, right? That's kind of just the basic thing that we can understand. Now, with vaccination mandates, obeying it didn't go against what the Bible said. But being forced to do something that doesn't make really sense scientifically also seemed wrong at the same time. So is going against vaccination mandates a sin, or are we supposed to fight it? Or how does a Christian kind of think through that?
Yeah, and so I think there was a complex array of factors that were taken into account that we also discussed on the podcast, I think early on last year or something like that. Yeah. Or late last year, I forget when, about, vaccination mandates. So I won't review that specifically. I will go into this area though. Your body is a holy temple of God. So if you believe that what you're putting in your body, it could be potentially dangerous and you're convicted of it, the government can't force you to go against your convictions, because it is a holy conviction. It's a conviction given by God. Even Paul would tell people not to assert your will over someone's convictions, even if they're a younger, more immature Christian. Remember about the vegetable eating and all that stuff? He wouldn't force them to eat meat, right? That he never did that. He would just say, these are younger Christians, but you can't go against their conviction. You could teach them, and you can inform them about how good it is to eat meat and things like that. But you can't make someone go against their conscience. Now we know about what the vaccine really does and how it lowers actually your immune response rate over time. And people are like, oh yeah, my antibody count is crazy high. But turns out that you can inject anything in your body and your antibody count will be high, because your body is responding to a foreign substance. Yeah. And so now we know things like there are higher cases of myocarditis from people that are vaccinated than
Oh,
people
yeah.
who just get COVID,
Mm.
especially with young people.
Mhm.
It's just experimental. If the government said, you know what, I'm going to mandate, Sam, that you cut off your left arm for the good of the people, are you going to do that? The obvious answer, I don't think anybody's going to say yes, just because the government mandated for you to do something with your body.
Right.
Hey, body's your own, and you are responsible to take care of that body. So I would very, very easily say, you have a conviction that you shouldn't cut off your arm because it's a holy temple to God, then yeah, the government cannot
Mm.
coerce you into cutting off your arm. You have a conviction that you don't want to introduce foreign substances into a government that you trust less and less every day, then yeah, you shouldn't. You should follow your convictions. And I think now, this is in addition to what we talked about, because we talked about, how the R&D and the development with the fetal cell linings and things like that before. But this is in addition to that.
Speaking of the weaker brother thing, after our vegan podcast, which people thought you were very strong in your response.
They thought I was strong in my response?
Yeah, very, very strong in your response. But
As
people,
opposed to weak?
I mean, I guess,
No.
but they were like, whoa. But people have been calling me a weaker brother for no reason. That's not the point of that podcast. And also, I think it's also sometimes when I would drink oat milk, but it's because I'm lactose, people. It's not that I don't want to drink real milk.
Did I tell you about my story about my lactose intolerance?
You defeated it or something?
Yeah, everyone in my family is lactose
No,
intolerant.
mine's undefeatable.
So what I did was I was determined by my faith that I will not be lactose intolerant. So I think it was my high school or college years. I decided I'm going to just drink milk.
Yeah.
And I suffered in the bathroom, but I said, I'm not going to stop. Apparently, lactose intolerance is something that you can get over. I didn't know, but I didn't know all the science to it. I just said, I refuse to be someone that can't drink milk. I wanted to drink milk so badly. So it hasn't gone away ever since then. I've been able to drink milk.
I've tried this multiple times and I've just suffered every time.
You just got to take a week.
No, I really, really did.
No, I don't necessarily recommend my course of action. I don't want you to start getting like ulcers in your stomach or something.
Yeah.
But it is something that, we are now finding out more and more. Is oat milk really good for you? And is a question mark, to be honest.
It is.
There's some people that say people say that's actually bad for you.
Uh-huh.
And some people are like, oh, it's just whatever. It's not really healthy. It's not. No one really thinks oat milk is really healthy. No one's like, oh, oat milk is such a good healthy substitute to milk. No one, I think, that has any knowledge of how oat milk is produced and the nutrients in it think that it's either neutral or bad.
I actually just drink it to cut my coffee because of the acidity. But I'm wondering, and here's a random question: how do you normally drink your coffee? Just in case someone wanted to buy you a coffee or something, or maybe even me a coffee or something.
What? I'm drinking mine black right now.
As I've aged, I've had a need to cut it a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes direct acid in your stomach's no good.
It's just rough. So what about, I guess continuing on from that, what about gray areas? Or, dun, 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 maybe they're not gray areas. For example, knowing that our tax dollars are being used for ungodly practices. I remember there was a time where this was something that I had to think through, understanding that abortion was now being offered as healthcare. And if that was the case, then my tax dollars, I'm paying for someone's abortion in certain cases.
Oh, yeah. The government is propping up Planned Parenthood 100%. Right. And they're making sure that Planned Parenthood is going through all the urban areas, especially our predominantly black neighborhoods. So all these black babies are being killed, coerced to have their babies killed, saying you can't afford to bring up this baby. You want them to have a bad life. You can't even afford formula. So instead of giving them money, what they'll do is they'll just have the babies aborted.
So if we knew for certain that these things were happening with our money that we're paying to the government, is that a reason for us to say we're not going to pay taxes anymore? How do we even think through that?
So there's a difference between paying taxes and being prophets, meaning we understand what Jesus said when he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. God deserves all of our worship, our whole body, mind, body, and soul. But there are taxes that we ought to pay because we are living in a nation with a government that requires of us to pay taxes. So we can't willy-nilly on our own, accord, decide what is rightful for us to give or not. That would just ensue chaos. So you can't do that. However, what we can do is after we pay our taxes, we can lobby against the evils that the government is doing.
Yeah.
So we're not just to blindly follow whatever the government does. So we can pay taxes and then we can lobby saying, don't use our tax dollars on this. Otherwise, we will not vote for you, you Democrat, again. Like, honestly, that's what we should do if we're talking about abortion now.
Yeah.
But instead, Christians are so weak then. They're like, well, I don't like the character of this other guy. And it's about character. It's about the morality and soul of our country. And so we have been bamboozled into thinking that's the way we ought to vote. Let alone, like, what is it, Martin Luther? I forgot who said. Someone said it. I would rather vote for a Muslim dog catcher than someone who is incapable of the executive office that calls themselves a Christian. And so who's capable? That's who we vote for. We don't just vote people in because of character and ideology. That should be alongside of ultimately what policies they'll produce. And that's not how we vote anymore. In fact, 100% 2024, the 2024 election will be a vote on who has the worst character.
Yeah.
And then you just don't vote for that person, right?
Yeah,
you vote for the other guy or woman, which is not how healthy voting systems would function. Yeah, you don't vote saying who's more worse, I'll vote for the other guy. That's a terrible way to bring up candidates. And unfortunately, it looks like it'll be right now, it looks like it'll be between Donald Trump or Joseph R. Biden again.
Question that I thought was really interesting that was brought up in one of our discussion groups after our WWE session, and it was a discussion on globalism. Does the United States, America number one, have biblical cause to meddle with the affairs of other countries? Example, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or even, in the case if China infiltrates Taiwan, or even Russia attacking Ukraine, there is this kind of belief that the U.S. is the world police. Is that a biblical thing? Should we be meddling in other people's affairs, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I think there is a limit to how much we can interfere with other nations' politics and things like that. But when it comes to, I think the right way to think about it is our number one priority should be for the well-being of the United States. So if another country threatens the well-being of the United States, we have a responsibility to get involved with those affairs. Let's say, China wants to take over Taiwan. Taiwan provides for us 90% of the chip market, the microchip market.
Yeah.
And we know that when China takes it over, it's going to affect our industries across the board, whether it's not just computers, but cars, anything that has a chip in it, right? And so we will insert ourselves to make sure that our country isn't drastically impacted by what's going on between China and Taiwan. I think that's a fair thing to do, honestly. I think any smart governing system will know that they need to inject themselves into that kind of, potential debacle between two nations. So geopolitics can be, a little bit complex. I don't think that it's as simple as, we're policing the world. I think people can think that, but obviously that's not the point. The point isn't that we're just going to exercise our dominance over every other nation. It's so that we could take care of the citizens, the will of the people, like it says in the Declaration of Independence. This is a government that is for the will of the people.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have a republic, and we have, statutes set up to protect the will of the people. And so I would land there. It's a little bit more complex than that we're just the world's police. I don't think it's as simple as that. And I get that we can be like that, I guess, in the extreme sense. we could go around saying, hey, you do this, you do that, and there's just kind of chalk it up to this is good for our nation.
Mm-hmm.
But there obviously is going to be a limit, and that limit is, what we can debate on in the future.
I have one more question, but before that, I have a fun question. What is your favorite statute? Mine is the Statute of Liberty. Sorry. Mine is probably Amendment number 2. The right to bear arms.
Mm-hmm.
Last question is, and this is just kind of general, and this wraps up our section on politics, but how does my obedience to the government bring honor to Christ, especially if they are bad or evil governments? How does my obedience bring honor to our Lord?
Yeah, I mentioned it in the Wednesday session, but obedience to the authority figure is ultimately acknowledging that God is the ultimate authority over all authorities. He's the one that disseminates authority, gives authority, sets up rulers and kings. He's the one that will judge them and punish them.
Yep.
And so we follow them because we honor God. And that's the spirit in which we should follow our authority figures. And so, we have been trying to break down all the structures of authority in our modern day world, but it is to our detriment. It is going to cause disorder in our circles, communities, nation. Look at even the family. If I say the husband is the head of the household, he's the authority figure in the house.
Right.
And when you respect the husband, you do it as you respect God. And that's exactly what Paul says. You honor the husband as you honor Christ. And so that's how it should be done, because we honor Christ, not necessarily because the government or the husband is someone who deserves respect. That's secondary. You want a government that should, garner respect. You want a husband that should garner respect. You as a man, you want to be that husband that garners respect, right? But that's beside the point. The point is you honor those authority figures over you because you honor God. And that's actually the first commandment with a promise. Commandment number 5, honor your father and mother. They're your first authority figures. And so authority is a big thing to do with the glory and the will of God. And so understanding that will help you understand why God is a God of order and not chaos, that you don't just live life according to your whims and what you think is right, but according to his laws, and you trust in him. And it takes a lot of trust to place yourself under submission to someone who you don't think is right or good, that kind of thing. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that, like I said, we just willy-nilly follow them either, right? We're not just, puppets and lemmings. We don't just mindlessly follow. We'll submit, but we also are called to be prophets. So if your husband is doing something evil, you're not just supposed to simply submit and then do nothing. But, like the Bible exhorts, like in 1 Peter chapter 3, in quietness and submission, your holy life is supposed to tell them and show them how wrong they are. So in a way, you are showing them in the most wise way, the way God has ordained, what your husband is doing wrong. So it's not just to stay silent and complacent and just to, let it happen. That's not that's not what we mean by saying we submit to our authorities. But it is to give them honor, to give them respect.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And I really enjoyed and was encouraged in the way that you closed out the session on politics, just reminding all those that were there that our declaration is that Jesus Christ is Lord. And I hope that that's something that we can continue to declare and continue to really reflect on as we live as Christians throughout this week. Any comments before we close? Because there's some things that I want to mention for next week.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, next week we're going to be talking about art. And I'm a little nervous because you know me, I'm quite the artiste. So
yeah.
I feel like you're going to go after rap music or something.
No, that's music.
Oh, that's musica. Anyway, we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we again talk about art. What can you just give me like a little sneak, like what kind of art, what is it remonstrant art, or like
what
is that art?
you mean Rembrandt?
Oh no, I like him.
Renaissance.
No, there's like a remonstrant or something. Yeah, no,
Why
but
did your voice get all quiet?
Renaissance art, Rembrandt, all great. Leonardo da Vinci, cool guy.
Uh-huh.
Who was the ear man? Was that Picasso? No, that was Da Vinci. But anyway, we'll be talking about art, so stay tuned. Gonna be exciting. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.